What's up, guys? Welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Ordell, and in today's video we're going to be covering a very interesting and honestly dangerous setup that you can use as either white or black, and there's really not much, if anything at all, that the opponent can do about it. Now, many of you have probably heard of the modern defense with g6 and bishop g7, or maybe even the Owens defense with b6 and bishop b7. With the Hippopotamus defense, we do both of these, put our pawns on e6 and d6, and tuck our knights straight behind. Now, I know some of you are probably wondering how on earth can this be any good. I'm going to go over the setup, but I've seen many top-level grandmasters like Nakamura, Kasparov, and Spassky use this setup to their advantage. Let's say white plays a move like e4. Now we can play g6, and honestly, the move order in the Hippopotamus defense doesn't matter a ton. It just matters that we reach the setup. Let's say white plays d4. We now play bishop g7, fianchettoing our first bishop, attacking d4, and following a move like knight f3, we can continue with d6, knight d7, maybe e6. I mean, so far this is pretty normal and pretty common for the modern defense, but following a move like queen d2, we now see ourselves play b6, trying to reach the Hippo setup. Let's say white plays bishop c4, we can now play bishop b7, fianchettoing our second bishop, and using this light squared bishop to put pressure on the e4 pawn, and following castling kingside, play knight e7. This is really the setup that we're trying to reach. Again, the move order doesn't matter a ton. We're basically trying to fianchetto both of our bishops, put our pawns on e6 and d6, and our knights on e7 and d7. Many may see this position and wonder why on earth would anyone ever play this. It looks slow, positional, boring, drawish at best, but honestly, I think that this opening has huge potential and huge potential for attacking counter play. The first issue for white is how on earth do you attack this setup? I mean, black really doesn't have any weaknesses. We have two bishops here attacking the center of the board on e4 and d4, and knights on e7 and d7 that really cover f5 all the way to c5. The reason I bring this up is that let's say white plays eventually a move like e5. Well, now the bishop on b7 becomes alive, and this knight on e7 has homes on d5 and f5. And if d5 is played, the dark squared bishop comes alive, and our knight on d7 has dark squares on c5 and e5. So it's very hard for white to push in the center of the board. And if white pushes on the perimeter with a move like a4, white would love to play a5 followed by a6, kicking our bishop back to a move like c8, gaining a ton of space. But we're not going to let white do this, and we're also not going to play a5 because then the b5 square could become weak. In fact, against a5, the b4 ideas would be in the air. So instead, we're just going to play a6. And the whole idea of this is now against a5, we have this b5 option. Again, if a4 is played, we play a6 with the idea of b5. And if h4 is played, we play h6 with the idea of preparing a g5 push. In this position, we play b5, attacking the bishop on c4. If bishop b3, we play b4, and then take the pawn on e4 because the knight currently defends that pawn. So right now, bishop d3 is more or less forced, in which case we can play c5. And I really like black's position here. Strong pawn structure on the queen side. We're looking to gain more space. And here, if a move like d takes c5, we take back with the knight. Now both of our bishops, our light squared and our dark squared, are both extremely active. We have a strong knight on c5 attacking d3 and e4. This knight can come to c6, b4, maybe even e5. I love black's game here. So really, I just showed you guys the main ideas behind the Hippopotamus defense. There's not a ton of opening theory, strategy, and lines behind it. It's more of just a setup you reach to achieve flexibility in a hyper-dynamic game. I thought in today's video we wouldn't just stop it there, but go over an instructional game played by the very strong grandmaster Tony Miles back in the year of 2000 as he used this opening to his success in tournament competition. Here, white started off with d4, and we see Miles play e6. The way that this setup was reached was a little bit strange, but it was reached nonetheless. We see c4 followed by b6, a3, g6. Obviously, both sides. I mean, we're taking our time here. No one is in any rush. We see knight c3, bishop g7, and after e4, knight e7, we see Miles slowly unraveling the Hippopotamus setup. After knight f3, bishop b7. Now both of our bishops are putting pressure in the center of the board. And now following bishop d3, the only thing left is to play d6, followed by knight d7. And now after rook e1, we see the moves h6, protecting g5, followed by the move a6, protecting b5. Now, this is also very common to put our pawns on a6 and h6. Really, with these pawns, what we're doing is we're protecting the 5th rank. I mean, it's really hard here for white to get through this barrier. How on earth do you do this without giving something up? Well, white patiently played the move bishop e3, simply developing the pieces. But one thing that I like about the Hippopotamus Defense is that we don't just have to wait for white to push a pawn or to push a pawn in the center, but we can actually attack ourselves with moves like g5. I love this move that Miles played, really trying to advance on the king side of the board, put some pressure on this f4 square. And now after rook c1, white would eventually love to play the move c5. So we play c5 ourselves, looking to put pressure on d4. And now if white takes the pawn on c5 or plays d5, in either case, this bishop on g7 will come alive. We see the move d5 from white, trying to advance in the center of the board, and now knight g6. I love this setup, this knight attacking f4 and e5. The knight on d7 also attacks that, as well as the bishop. I mean, right now we are trying to take complete control of the dark squares, and following bishop c2, we see Miles continue with queen e7, just slowly improving the position. And now, after queen d2, castling kingside, white plays rook cd1, trying to get this rook on a semi-open file, meaning that this pawn could eventually take on e6, and then the queen can take on d6. But we now see the move knight d e5. Here, white could have took the pawn on e6, but now we would simply take the knight with check, and following a move like g takes f3, continue with bishop e5. Yes, after e takes f7, white would technically be up a pawn, but I mean, here we take with the rook. We're about to play rook f8. We have a completely won game here. This king is in big trouble, and we're about to go for the kill. We have moves like knight h4 attacking f3, and there's just no way that white can hold on to this very poor pawn structure. So white was smart to not get greedy and take the pawn on e6, and instead play the move knight takes e5, in which we see Miles play bishop takes e5. And here in this position as white, it's very hard to know what to do. I mean, how do you attack black in this position when black literally has no weaknesses? Again, d takes e6 is not the best move, because now we play f takes e6. We have complete control of the d6 square, and now we can play rook f7 and rook f8, forming a battery ram on the f file, and I love black's game here. So instead of playing a move like d takes e6, trying to break things open, which only hurts white, we see the move bishop d3. This move doesn't do much, but at the same time, I don't really want to call it bad, because there's not much that white can do. We see black continue to improve the position with queen f6, trying to take control of the dark squares here, and following the move knight a4. I actually really like this move from white, attacking this b6 pawn, trying to get some counterplay. Black could have played a move like queen d8, but we see the much more aggressive rook a b8, preparing for knight takes b6 with bishop c8 attacking this knight. This knight can't come to d7, forking the queen and rook, because the bishop would simply take it, and this knight can't really be protected. I mean, I guess white can play a move like queen a5, but against a move like queen a5, we simply play queen d8, and we're about to pick that knight off the board. White could have took the bishop on c8, but now black has rook takes b2, and I honestly totally understand why white didn't want to take this piece. I mean, after queen a5, we now play rook takes c8. If rook b1, we have a rook c b8. We're sitting at even material, and when you look at the activity of black's pieces, I totally understand why white was not big on this line. So instead of taking the bishop on c8, in which case black could play rook takes b2 attacking the queen, we see knight a4 defending the pawn on b2. And now we see black play bishop d7 attacking this knight, and yet again, the knight running away with knight c3. Now in chess, you always got to ask yourself, how can I improve the positioning of my pieces? I mean, just looking at our pieces, our bishop on e5 is very strong, as well as our queen. Our knight is solid. Our bishop on d7 is solid, really holding the position together, but this rook on b8 can actually get better. It would be much better on b3, so we see the move, rook b3, putting pressure on this c3 knight, and now following rook b1, rook fb8, forming a battery ram on the b file, now putting more pressure on c3 and indirectly b2. So we see the move knight d1. White just trying to hold this position together, but we now see black play e takes d5, and following c takes d5, continue with knight f4, activating this knight, throwing it into the opponent's territory. And following bishop takes f4, we see g takes f4. And honestly, white is in a pretty tough spot here. I mean, white's pieces are very inactive. The rook on b1 isn't doing much except just defending the pawn on b2. The knight on d1 is doing nothing but holding the position together. The queen and the bishop are not doing much, as well as the rook on e1. But on the other hand, black's pieces, we have two very strong bishops putting some pressure on the king side of the board, a strong queen, and two rooks on b8 and b3. I mean, just causing havoc. We see white play bishop c2, trying to get rid of this rook on b3, but we now see an amazing move by Miles with rook takes h3. I mean, I personally probably never even would have thought of the move rook takes h3, but this is an absolutely fantastic move. Idea being, after g takes h3, this king is in big trouble. We have a bishop on e5 putting pressure, a bishop on d7 putting pressure, a solid queen, and a rook. Then after the move king h8 is about to come to g8, attacking the king on g1. This king has very little to no defenders right now in front of him, and very bad pawn structure. In fact, the pawn on g2 isn't even there now, and we see the move f3. Here white trying to get some kind of support for the king, but now we see rook g8 check, and following the move king h1, we see queen h4, and here white actually resigned. I mean, we're just threatening to take the pawn on h3, and if a move like queen h2, we simply take the rook on e1. I think the longest way for white to survive is with a move like rook g1, but now we simply just take the pawn on h3, continue with taking the pawn on f3. After a move like rook g2, we can now continue with bishop h3. I mean, this is just clearly losing for white. In addition to king h1 not working because of queen h4, king f1 also didn't work because of this same idea, attacking the pawn on h3. Let's say white plays a move like knight f2, trying to hold the position together. That's fine. We're simply going to take that pawn. After knight takes, play queen takes h3, rook g2 check. We're now attacking the king and about to take the queen on d2. Let's say white plays a move like king d1. We play queen takes f3 with check, and following king c1, take that queen off the board, play queen f2 check. If rook e2, we have queen d4 check followed by f3. This is a clearly better game for black. If you'd like to learn the theory on the Ponziani opening, a strong setup for white, click the video to the left. If you'd like to explore more chess openings in general, click the playlist to the right. Leave a comment to let me know what other videos you'd like to see covered on this channel. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.